Welcome to the Terror Time.
The first story is about the disfigured witch of Halloween night. The air was thick with anticipation on Halloween night. The town of Ravenswood, known for its eerie legends and paranormal nightmares, was buzzing with the excitement of trick-or-treating and the upcoming Halloween festival. But this year, something felt different. Something dark loomed in the shadows. At the edge of the town stood an old, decrepit mansion, rumored to be the home of a disfigured witch. The mansion had been abandoned for decades, its walls crumbling and windows shattered. No one dared to go near it, especially on Halloween night, when the witch was said to roam the halls, seeking revenge on those who disturbed her rest. Sarah, a college student with a penchant for spooky adventures, had always been fascinated by the mansion. She spent hours reading dark web horror stories and listening to paranormal stories on her favorite Scary Reddit Stories podcast. But nothing intrigued her more than the legend of the disfigured witch of Ravenswood. That Halloween, Sarah decided to take a step further than just listening to true horror stories. She wanted to experience one. Equipped with a flashlight, camera, and a playlist of spooky Halloween music to set the mood, Sarah ventured toward the mansion. The night was eerily quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of Halloween sounds, children laughing, eerie music, and the occasional scream from a haunted house attraction. As Sarah approached the mansion, she noticed the elaborate Halloween decorations that adorned the neighboring houses. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered on porches, and ghostly figures swayed in the wind. But the mansion stood in stark contrast to the festive spirit, its dark and foreboding presence casting a shadow over the entire street. Determined to uncover the truth behind the legend, Sarah pushed open the creaking gate and made her way up the overgrown path leading to the front door. The door, weathered and splintered, groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty hallway. A smell of decay hung in the air, and the floorboards creaked under her weight as she stepped inside. Sarah's heart raced as she explored the mansion, her flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. She passed by rooms filled with dusty furniture, cobwebs, and broken mirrors. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of dread, and Sarah could feel the presence of something, or someone, watching her. In the corner of her eye, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement. She quickly turned, her flashlight illuminating a figure at the end of the hallway. It was a woman, her body hunched and her face obscured by shadows. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized it was the disfigured witch of Ravenswood. The witch's appearance was horrifying. Her skin was pale and mottled, with deep scars running across her face. One of her eyes was missing, leaving a dark, empty socket, and her mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. She wore a tattered black dress, and her long, bony fingers clutched a crooked staff. Sarah tried to back away. The witch moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between them in an instant. The witch's voice was a harsh whisper, filled with malice and anger. "You dare enter my home on this cursed night?" Terror gripped Sarah as the witch raised her staff, the air around her crackling with dark energy. Sarah could feel the walls closing in, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. The witch's presence was suffocating, and Sarah knew she was in grave danger. But Sarah was not one to give up easily. She had faced her share of paranormal nightmares before, from sleep paralysis to encounters with ghostly apparitions. Drawing on her courage, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial of salt, a gift from a friend who was well-versed in paranormal investigations. With trembling hands, Sarah threw the salt at the witch, hoping to break the curse that bound her to the mansion. The witch let out a piercing scream as the salt touched her skin, her body convulsing in pain. The walls of the mansion shook, and the floor beneath Sarah's feet began to crack. As the witch's form began to dissolve, she uttered one final curse. "This is not the end, foolish girl. I will return, and when I do, you will pay the price for your insolence." With a final scream, the witch disappeared, leaving behind only a faint, dark mist. The mansion began to crumble around Sarah, the walls collapsing and the floor giving way. She ran as fast as she could, barely making it out of the front door before the entire building collapsed into a pile of rubble. Breathless and shaken, Sarah looked back at the ruins of the mansion. The legend of the disfigured witch was true, and she had barely escaped with her life. As she made her way back to town, the sounds of the Halloween festival grew louder, stark contrast to the terrifying encounters she had just experienced. Back in her dorm room, Sarah uploaded the footage she had captured to her computer, hoping to share her experience with the world. She knew it would make for a fascinating horror video, perhaps even one of those scary movie reactions that she loved to watch. But as she reviewed the footage, she noticed something chilling. In the background of the video, just as she had entered the mansion, a faint voice could be heard whispering her name. It was the witch calling out to her from beyond the grave. The thought sent shivers down Sarah's spine, and she quickly turned off the video, unable to watch any further. But the voice haunted her, echoing in her mind as she tried to sleep. That night, she dreamed of the witch, her disfigured face twisted in anger and pain. It was a paranormal nightmare that she would never forget. The next morning, Sarah awoke to find her room filled with the scent of decay, the same smell she had encountered in the mansion. Her heart pounded as she realized that the witch's curse had followed her home. The legend of the disfigured witch was not just a story, it was real, and Sarah was now a part of it. As she looked in the mirror, she noticed a small, dark spot forming on her cheek. It was the beginning of a scar, one that would slowly spread across her face, marking her as the witch's next victim. Sarah's story was not over. It had only just begun. The second story is about the ghosts of Tabor, Halloween revenge. The town of Tabor was quiet as Halloween night fell, its streets shrouded in an eerie silence. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the few people who ventured out felt an unshakable chill. The locals knew better than to linger outside on Halloween night. The tales of the ghosts of Tabor were too terrifying to ignore. Megan, a paranormal investigator with Twin Paranormal, had come to Tabor to document these infamous hauntings. She had heard the stories of disfigured entities seeking Halloween revenge, and she was determined to capture evidence of their existence. Armed with her camera and a playlist of spooky Halloween music, Megan ventured into the heart of Tabor's haunted district. The streets were lined with abandoned houses, their windows dark and their doors boarded up. The only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant howls of wind. Megan felt a sense of unease as she approached the old church at the center of town, the epicenter of Tabor's paranormal stories. Inside the church, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air was cold, and Megan could see her breath as she moved through the darkened halls. The walls were covered in old, faded tapestries, and the floor was littered with debris. The church had been abandoned for years, but Megan knew it was far from empty. As she set up her equipment, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows seemed to shift and move, and the sound of her footsteps echoed ominously in the empty space. The scary ambience was overwhelming, and she felt a deep sense of dread as she began her investigation. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and Megan could feel a presence nearby. She turned, her camera capturing the faint outline of a figure in the corner of the room. It was one of the ghosts of Tabor, a disfigured entity with hollow eyes and a twisted, malevolent grin. The figure moved closer, its form flickering like a ghostly apparition. Megan's heart raced as she tried to capture the entity on film. The figure let out a low, guttural growl, and Megan felt a surge of fear. She had encountered spirits before, but nothing like this. The entity's presence was overwhelming, its anger palpable in the air. The figure spoke, its voice a chilling whisper. "You dare disturb our rest on this cursed night?" Megan backed away, her mind racing. She had heard of the ghosts of Tabor. She had never expected to encounter them so directly. The entity's words echoed in her mind, and she realized too late that she had crossed a line. The ghosts of Tabor were not just restless spirits. They were seeking revenge for a wrong done to them long ago. As the figure advanced, Megan felt a cold hand grip her shoulder. She turned to see another disfigured entity, its face twisted in pain and anger. The church was now filled with the ghostly forms, each one more terrifying than the last. They surrounded her, their eyes filled with hatred. Megan's instincts kicked in, and she grabbed her camera, hoping to capture their images. But the ghosts had no intention of letting her escape. The room was filled with their chilling whispers, each one recounting the horrors they had endured. Megan could feel their pain, their anger, and their desire for revenge. In a desperate bid to escape, Megan ran towards the exit. The door slammed shut before she could reach it. The ghosts closed in, their forms becoming more solid and more terrifying with each passing moment. The room was now filled with a thick, oppressive darkness, and Megan could barely see her hand in front of her face. Suddenly, the air was filled with the sound of screaming, Megan's own voice echoing through the church as the ghosts reached out to her. She could feel their icy fingers on her skin, their breath on her neck. The camera slipped from her hands, falling to the ground with a loud clatter. Megan's world spun as the ghosts pulled her into the darkness, their whispers filling her mind with their terrible stories. The last thing she saw was their twisted, disfigured faces, their eyes filled with a malevolent joy as they exacted their revenge. When the townspeople found Megan's camera the next morning, it was covered in frost. Footage showed nothing but darkness, but the audio was filled with her terrified screams and the chilling whispers of the ghosts of Tabor. The legend of the disfigured entities seeking revenge had claimed another victim. Megan's story quickly became the talk of the town, another chapter in the dark history of Tabor. The locals whispered about the ghosts and their relentless pursuit of Halloween revenge, warning others to stay away from the haunted district on that cursed night. But for those who dared to listen closely, the ghosts' whispers could still be heard in the dead of night, counting their tales of suffering and revenge. And so the legend of the ghosts of Tabor lived on, a terrifying reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows on Halloween night. The third and the last story is about the haunting of the disfigured stranger. It was Halloween night, and the small town of Crestwood was alive with excitement. Children ran from house to house, their costumes glowing under the streetlights, while the adults prepared for the annual Halloween party. But amid the laughter and festivity, there was a chilling tale that lingered in the back of everyone's mind, a tale of a disfigured stranger who haunted the outskirts of town. Jessica, a young woman with a love for horror stories, had heard the legend many times. The stranger was said to be a man horribly scarred in a tragic accident, his face twisted and mangled beyond recognition. Every Halloween, he would emerge from the shadows, seeking out those who dared to venture too close to his domain. The story was told in hushed tones, with warnings to avoid the old abandoned house at the edge of the woods, a place where the disfigured stranger was said to dwell. Curiosity got the better of Jessica. She had always been fascinated by tales of the paranormal, spending hours reading true horror stories and watching horror recaps online. This year, she decided she would uncover the truth behind the legend. Armed with a flashlight and her phone, she set off towards the old house. The path to the house was overgrown, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. As Jessica walked, she could hear the faint sounds of the Halloween party in the distance, the cheerful music, the laughter, the sounds of children playing. But the further she ventured into the woods, the quieter it became. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath her feet and the distant call of an owl. As she approached the house, Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. The house was a crumbling ruin, its windows broken and its walls covered in ivy. A sense of dread settled over her as she pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned under her weight. The house was dark, the only light coming from her flashlight as she moved through the rooms. Each room was filled with decaying furniture and tattered curtains, the remnants of a life long forgotten. But there was something else, something that made Jessica's skin crawl. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and she could sense a presence lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and Jessica's breath misted in the air. She heard a soft shuffling sound behind her, and she spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Standing in the doorway was a figure, a man, his face hidden in the shadows. Jessica's heart pounded as the figure stepped into the light, revealing his grotesque features. His face was a twisted mass of scars and burns, his eyes cold and lifeless. The disfigured stranger had found her. The stranger raised a hand, pointing towards the door. Jessica took the hint and turned to run. The door slammed shut before she could reach it. The stranger's voice filled the room, a low, rasping whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "You shouldn't have come here." Jessica felt a cold hand on her shoulder, and she froze in place. The stranger was behind her, his breath hot on the back of her neck. She could feel the weight of his presence, anger and pain that radiated from him. The stories were true. He was a man wronged, a man seeking revenge on those who intruded on his solitude. In a desperate attempt to escape, Jessica reached for her phone, hoping to call for help. But the stranger was faster, his hand closing around her wrist with an iron grip. The phone slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor and sliding under a piece of broken furniture. Jessica's mind raced, her thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and regret. She had come looking for a story, but now she was living it, a true horror story that would never be told. The stranger's grip tightened, and Jessica felt a wave of darkness wash over her as she was pulled deeper into the house, into the shadows where the stranger dwelled. The next morning, when Jessica's friends went looking for her, all they found was her phone. Screen cracked and the battery dead. The house was empty, the rooms as silent as the grave. But in the darkness, if you listened closely, you could still hear the disfigured stranger's voice. A whisper on the wind, a warning to those who dared to enter his domain on Halloween night. Jessica was never seen again, and the legend of the disfigured stranger grew even darker. The townspeople avoided the old house, and the children whispered new tales of the girl who had disappeared on Halloween. But deep in the woods, the stranger still waited, his scarred face hidden in the shadows, ready to claim his next victim. And that wraps up our 3 chilling tales of disfigured entities on Halloween night. From vengeful witches to ghostly apparitions and terrifying strangers, these stories remind us that Halloween isn't just about costumes and candy. It's also a time when the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. If you enjoyed these spine-tingling stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more horror content. Let me know in the comments which story scared you the most, or if you've had any paranormal encounters of your own on Halloween night. And as always, keep your lights on this Halloween, because you never know what might be lurking in the shadows. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I'll see you in the next video.